This is Pastor Scott Conway with Quest Zion, and today we are talking about biblical marriage. But we're not just talking about biblical marriage for husbands and wives. We're actually talking about biblical marriage for the context of Christian dating, biblical dating. Now, in particular, I don't mean that the Bible has dating rules, but something that I talk about and I teach a lot of times is that when you are aiming ultimately at a permanent relationship, you are looking for a husband or a wife, you are looking for someone to be your partner in parenting, to raise children together, that's going to be a marriage typically. And when you are aiming at being married, sometimes people are just looking for the partner. But then here gets to be one of the keys is if you want to have a love, honor, cherish marriage, then can you start practicing love, honor, cherish without being married? Yeah, pretty much. In fact, I have sat down with 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, and we've talked about how, when you do a marriage, love, honor, cherish, there's a whole bunch of vows in there, and I'll ask them, I'll ask the little boys, when you get married, you will have a love relationship with a grown-up woman. Do any of you know any grown-up women you can practice loving now? And of course, the 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds know, Mom, I could practice with Mom. And someone would say, I could practice with Grandma. I could practice with my aunt. And some of them even say, I can practice with my sister or my stepsister. Similar thing with the girls, and go, I can practice with Dad, or I can practice with Grandpa, or I can practice with Uncle. Because some of the things that we do as part of a marriage relationship is actually part of a normal human relationship. So who do you love? Well, you love family, you love friends, and then when you're in a romance, presumably you love your romantic partner. When you get married, presumably you love your wife or your husband. That's why you married them, or at least there's a big part of why you married them. And so if you can practice love from a very, very young age, then why not be practicing? Then by the time you get married, you can be really good at it because you've been doing it for a very long time. What about honor? Can you practice honor? Well, of course you can practice honor. The Bible itself says, honor your mother or father. Guess who you can practice honoring? And then figure out the difference between honor and obey. And then sort that out and be a great representative of the family. Be a great person where your addition to the family brings honor to the family, whatever that means. And I'm not going to be unpacking some of those things right now in this message, because all I want to illustrate is that these things are things you can be practicing from a very young age. You don't even have to wait until you're an adult and you're thinking about dating and you're considering getting in a permanent relationship. These are things very young children can do, because if historic stats hold true, about 9 out of 10 of our children will grow up to get married at least once. And about 80% of our children will grow up to be parents. And so if those are the numbers, maybe it would be helpful for them to be learning. Now, I'm a Christian man. Do I want to have a biblical marriage? Of course I want to have a biblical marriage. Now, here gets to be one of the problems. What is a biblical marriage? Because if you ask someone, say, I have a biblical marriage, or they have a biblical marriage. Here's the thing, with stunning consistency, most of what they mean is the man's in charge and the woman submits. In one great Christian marriage and a great partnership, he is a medical doctor, she is a school teacher, she will frequently say, I am under authority. And what she means by that is that my husband is in charge of the house. He is the leader of the house, whether I agree with him or not. And they have a great marriage. They have a great partnership. They love and adore each other. And that absolutely, totally works for them. Now, if you've been following my teaching enough, you know kind of my definition of some of this stuff might be a little bit at variance, but let's take a look at things of men and women. And let us have a quick look today at some of the things that men and women should do. Now, it just so happens I have pink and I have blue. So maybe I'll just go with some of the stereotypes. So if the woman is to submit, I don't know how well you can see it. Let me see if I can thicken that. Submit. Because the Bible does say, wives, submit to your husbands. And that's Ephesians 5:22. And so if the woman is to submit, what does that mean? Well, if you follow my teaching enough, you know that part of that means that he needs to be a team, underscore team leader. Now, part of what that means for me is that he has to be able to pass through the 8 gates of submission. So when I talk about the 8 gates of submission, there's 2 rules for private instruction and 2 rules for public instruction, and then 4 considerations for the leader themselves as a leader. The 2 rules for private instruction is there a reason to delay obedience? Is there a reason to disobey? So if someone's giving me instruction and that I have a role where part of my job is to submit to that leader. It could be that I'm one of their direct reports in their company. It could be that I'm under authority for some other legal reason. That is there a reason for me to not follow the instruction yet? And sometimes, like if I'm working for someone and I don't really understand what it is that's expected of me, or maybe they're a little bit emotional right now and I'm not entirely sure they've thought it all the way through yet. I'm going to need to get some clarification before I go do something. Or maybe they're giving me a specific instruction on actions to do, but I think I have a sense of the goal they want to achieve, and there's a much cleaner way to do that. And I need to have a discussion before I take action. So those would be valid reasons to delay obedience, where I think I understand what it is I'm kind of supposed to do, and I need to get some clarification before I take some action. And then, is there a good reason to disobey? Now, it could be like even in the military situation where you are not required to obey an illegal order. You are not required to obey an immoral order. And so you can legally, even though there's a very, very strong chain of command, you can disobey a direct order. Now you're risking being brought up on insubordination charges, but if you are found to be right, that it was an unlawful order, that the system will back you up. So even in what we often consider the most tight chain of command, there's still reasons you are allowed to disobey a direct command. So if someone is giving you an immoral instruction, if someone is giving you a destructive instruction, if someone is giving you an instruction where you know this is bad, there might be a reason to disobey. And then for the group ones, they're very similar. Is there a reason to belay an order? Is there a reason to countermand an order? Basically, it's the group version of delay goes to belay, and disobey goes to countermand. And when you're dealing with the leader themselves, is there a reason to remove the leader from leadership? Is there a reason to remove leader from, and if there is it temporary or permanent? So a temporary removal could be they're emotionally compromised. It could be that they're in an altered state of consciousness, that they're drunk or they're sick, or there's something that has their emotional state compromised. Their thinking is compromised. That right here, right now, they're not making good decisions. Generally, they do okay, so there's no reason to remove them permanently, but temporarily. And then permanently is, okay, this person is just a bad leader. And by the way, if you're going to remove someone from leadership permanently, and you're going to remove them from the leadership where they are exerting and maybe have the position of leadership, like they're your boss at work, removing them from leadership might be reporting them to their higher ups and see if they get fired, or it could be you quit your job. Removing someone from total leadership, if you're married, might go to the level of a divorce. So this can be pretty serious, which of course then brings us to the other part of temporary, permanent. And then another one is in part or in whole. So for instance, if say I as the husband come home and I am telling my wife what to do with the kids, but I don't know what's really going on with the kids. I'm not the one who's home with the kids. And suppose she's home with the kids. Suppose she's home with the kids and she's even homeschooling the kids. So it's not just that she's home with the kids when the kids aren't in school, that she's just home with the kids. And she's the one educating them. She's the one with all of the direct information. And I'm the one with very little information, but a whole lot of opinions. She might decide, you know what, I am not going to follow your leadership when it comes to the thing you don't know that much about. It would be very similar to if my wife had a full-time career and I'm the one at home watching the kids, because we decided that, you know, with my background and my education, that I'm really qualified to homeschool the kids. But I'm going to tell her what she needs to do at work. Well, I don't know what's going on at her job. I don't know what's going on in her career. What business would it be of mine, even if I'm the man of the house, to be telling my wife how to conduct herself at a career at her workplace where I don't have hardly any information about what's going on there? And so that's part of submit and team leadership. And that kind of sets the tone for this idea. If it is the job of the wife to submit, it is therefore the counterpart of the job of the husband to lead in such a way so that her submission is a good move on her part. And in particular, I go as far as this, that submission should be a gift to the submitted. What that means is she goes along with good decisions because that takes having to make the decisions off of the table for her, that she doesn't have to. And this isn't even just as between husband and wife. I was working with my aunt, and she had asked me to put up some shelves, and she had told me what it is she kind of thought she wanted. And I took her thoughts and I put together my plan, and I told her, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this one here, this one's splitting the difference here. And that's what I'm looking at doing. Because what I'm doing is I'm giving her the opportunity to not have to make a decision again. I'm giving her the opportunity to not have to give the instructions again and to not have to think about it again. But I am also presenting it to her. So if she has an opinion, if she wants it different, she has an opportunity to jump in with her thoughts, to jump in with her desires, and I will accommodate them. But giving her the opportunity to just go along with a good decision is a gift to her, but that she is not compelled to just have to obey because I said so and I'm the man and she's the woman and women have to do whatever men say. That's not what the deal is. So there's the counterpart. If it is the job of the wife to submit, that should be a plus to her, because if he is making good decisions for the team, which includes him and her, includes him, her, and the kids, then she has the opportunity to not have to keep her decider cap on. Now, one example of this that probably illustrates it in a way that is easier to follow if you're not married and you don't have kids. Think about dating. So part of the illustration I have of this concept in submission as a gift to the submitted is that I have a lady friend, Dee, and she told me one of her favorite things about going out with me is that she doesn't have to decide. that she knows if I have invited her out, that all she has to do is say yes, and she knows there's a plan. And if she just shrugs and I don't know, whatever you want, she knows I have a plan and that I've thought about her in this plan, and she knows she will have a good day. I'm going to use one clean example is a Legoland date that I did with her. So I invited her out for a Legoland date. And the information I needed is, would you like to go to Legoland? Because that's going to be the core of the thing. And so if that's not a no, or if that's definitely a yes, there's the offer. And what time do you need to be home? That's the core information that I needed. And she knew she could come. And if she had no opinion on anything, she didn't have to decide what ride she wanted to go on. She didn't have to decide what to have, where to have, when to have lunch. She didn't have to decide about dinner. She didn't have to make the reservation. She didn't have to make anything happen, because she knows she's got a team leader, and all she needs to do is just say, that's a good decision. I'm just going to go with it. And now this part's important. She also knows anytime she has an opinion, anytime she has a desire, anytime she's done any thinking and she wants to share that, she can. And then that gets factored back in over here. So when she saw something like it was apple fries, I think it was, she's like, oh, well, that sounds really interesting. And so I could ask, like, interesting enough to try them? And she said, yeah, I think so. It's like, all right, let's get some. And then we got some. It can be that simple. And then another thing is like, oh, well, this might be an interesting place to eat. And says, well, I have lunch planned over there. If there's a reason you would rather eat over here than over there, then we'll just switch it over. And she's like, oh, well, what's this other place like? I said, well, it has this and this and this. And like, yeah, that sounds fine. And so she said, just go with that. I did ask her a question about the time she had in the evening, if she would like to go eat on the pier or if it was more important for her to get home quickly. And she's like, ooh, the pier sounds nice. So then off we went, heading further away from home, and we headed out to have dinner on the pier. And we started to do a couple of things along the way that I thought would be interesting to her. And they were. And that's her submission to decisions that she likes. But here gets to be the key is she doesn't have to figure it out. Because one of the challenges she has when she spends time with so many other groups of people, whether it's her friends or other gentlemen, is how often she has to make it happen. How often she has to make the plans, how often she has to ask, how often she has to call and make the reservations, how often she has to be the decider. And sometimes she says, I just want a break sometimes. And that's where the submission should be a gift to the submitted. So having laid that out, so Ephesians 5:22, wives submit to your husbands, which by the way comes right after 5:21, which is submit one to another. So whatever submission is, submission can't be me boss, you obey. Because if submission is me boss, you obey, there's no way for you and I to be in this mutually submissive relationship where I'm the boss, you have to do what I say, and you're the boss, you have to do what I say. Then it circles back around to also like, hey, and you wives, this means you submit to your husband too. Okay, well, whatever submission means in 5:22 is the same submission it means in 5:21. So submission can't be the husband's the boss and the little woman at home just does whatever he says, because there's no way for that to be reciprocal. But if submission is, I will go along with your good ideas, I will go along with your good decisions. And if you do that with each other, if I have a good decision, you have a good decision. I have my idea, you have your idea. Oh, wait. If we put these two ideas together and then you jump in, oh, that actually makes me think of this. And it's like, that's a good improvement. Let's go with that. Oh, wait, hey, could we add this? And I'm not sure that will work. Yeah, you're right. That might not work. But what about this? And then elevates and it keeps on going up, because rather than shooting down each other's ideas, We are adding to and expanding because I'm going with your good ideas. You're going with my good ideas. And then we bring the husbands and the wives together, and the husband makes good decisions where all the wife has to do is go along with a good decision. So in my world, in this teaching, if someone says, well, I'm not obeying my husband, so let me see if I get this straight. No matter what your husband says, your automatic answer is, I'm going to do the opposite. So like, for instance, if the house is burning down and he says, grab the kids, get out of the house, I'm not going to. If that's what you want me to do, I'm not doing it. Obviously not. So obedience, disobedience, submission, lack of submission has to do with, like, is the idea a good idea? And if the idea isn't something that needs to be delayed or disobeyed or belayed or countermanded, if the leader is making good decisions, so doesn't need to be removed from leadership temporarily or permanently, does not need to be removed from leadership in part or in whole, let's go with the leader's decision and let the leader lead, and let that leadership make your life easier. Otherwise, if you would rather be the one making all the decisions all the time, and you would rather be the one having to figure stuff out all of the time, and you would rather be the dominating one and have nobody else ever making any decisions, well, I mean, that's a possibility. And there are households who are built that way. And that is a deal the grown-ups get to make with each other. But now let's look at another counterpart here. Men are commanded to love their wives. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And that is still in Ephesians. So if you start at 5:22, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. So whatever that submission is, it is the kind of submission you give to Jesus. And what kind of instructions does Jesus give you? Well, he's giving you good instructions that don't need to have delayed obedience, that don't need to be disobeyed, that don't need to be belayed, that don't need to be countermanded. And that Jesus does not need to be removed from leadership. Human men might. But then the husbands, just a few verses later, told, and husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So now we're back to, okay, how does Jesus love the church? So we know on submission, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So the submission to the husband should be, when I am weary and heavy laden, my husband should give me rest. When my decider is all decided out, my husband should give me rest. When my figure outer is all figured out, my husband should give me rest. When I am weary, when I am heavy laden, when I am burdened, when I am overworked and overwhelmed, and I need a break, my husband should show up and give me a break. Now, my business partner, business leader, boss, depending what moment you find us in, has found that when I come to her, very often say, I have a request. What she's noticed is that with most of her world, someone coming with like, I have a request means I have a thing I want you to do. Something she's noticed for me is I tell her when I have a request, I'm asking her to let something go and I'll handle it. Well, I'll tell her, it's like, okay, look, you're getting tightly wound. I have a request. Stop, take a breath. I'll handle this. You relax for a little while. And she's realized now that the words of Scott Conway, I have a request, almost always means something that will serve her. Now, sometimes if I have something I need done, I will let her know that there's something I need done. But most of the times when I interrupt with, I have a request, it's a request for her to let something go, to put something down. Let me take care of it. Take a break, take a breath, relax, grab a snack, take a nap, whatever I think she may need, so that she can come back fresh. Because sometimes, I don't know if this happens to you, happens to me, happens to her, life, work, business, kids, family just kind of beats you up a bit. And sometimes you need a break. But you can't really take a break because all of this is your job unless some leader comes up with this idea and you can trust the leader's decision that they're going to make decisions that you can go along with. So now we come down here to love. Husbands, love your wives. Now, part of love, we have 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8. Love is patient, love is kind. You may be familiar with that passage. If you're not familiar with that passage, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4-8. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, is not arrogant. And there's this whole set of, I think it's about 14 traits that love is and love is not, roughly evenly split. So like love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love is not arrogant, love does not boast. And so there's this balance of what it is and what it isn't. And so if the husband's job is to love his wife, well, what would the counterpart to loving be? Well, that would imply then you can help your husband love you more by being lovable. So if love is patient, well, you can help me be patient by not taxing my patience, by not nagging me and belittling me. Well, here gets to be a trick on nagging. If I take initiative, so I just get it done, and if I have I have a definition of nagging. I know Scott Conway has a definition. Shocking. If you tell me or ask me something once, I get 1 point of initiative if I do it at once. 0 points of initiative if you have to tell me or ask me twice. -1 if you're up to 3 times. If you have to tell me or ask me more than 3 times, you are officially nagging me. But what is the easiest way for me to not get nagged? Don't put someone in a position to have to tell me or ask me the same thing 4 times. So long as you never have to go to 4, I'm not being nagged. Now, what that means then is if love is patient and I get really impatient with being nagged, well, on the love side, I can take enough initiative to either say no, in which case drop it, or to do it right away, or to do it where you can trust that you don't need to stay on me about it because you know it's on my list. It's on Scott's we'll be done list, not on your honey-do list. And so part of love is I am to be patient with you. Part of being lovable is you do not do the behaviors that you know tax my patience, unless you have a good reason to do so. Love is kind. Well, it's easy to be kind to kind people. Now, it's harder to be kind to really mean, ornery, nasty people. And so if you show up with kindness, it's easier for me to practice kindness. Now, it also says love is not jealous. Well, if I make some effort to not intentionally make you jealous, and assuming you have a healthy level of personal internal security, so that you're not getting jealous for no reason or stupid reason, that if I behave in a way to not intentionally make you jealous, you're helping me love you because that is a trait of lovableness. And so on down the list. So if I have a command to love you and you practice being lovable, you help me love you. Just like if I lead well so that my leadership passes through those 8 gates of submission, then I help you submit. Because you can't submit, well, let me rephrase that. You should not submit to something you ought not to do. So if you should delay, you should disobey, you should belay, you should countermand, because that is the wise thing to do, the smart thing to do, the value-driven thing to do, the principle-driven thing to do, then you shouldn't be submitting to bad leadership. And you shouldn't be submitting to a leader who's leading in an area they have no business leading in. And you should not be submitting to a leader who is leading badly. So submission, at least to me in my world, is conditioned upon whether submission is a gift to the submitted because the leader is leading well. Well, then we bring that down here to love and lovable. It's easy to love the lovable. And so if part of my job is to love, I can do my job easier if you do the lovable, the counterpart of the job. Now, let's take a look at another piece here. So part of the job of the wife is to respect. Well, of course, what is the counterpart to respect is, of course, to be respectable. So if your job is to respect me, and respect is to lift others up, respect is to speak of others well, respect is to show deference where there's authority, respect is to, not gossip behind the back for one thing, among many others. It's some measure of loyalty. It's some measure of decorum. All these things that are part of, like, you show respect. Well, that would imply then being respectable enables respect, because if I am not respectable, it's hard to show a lot of respect to a disrespected person, a disrespectable person. So the extent to which I give you things to respect, the extent to which I demonstrate myself as worthy of respect, as respectable, it allows you to continue to be respectful of me. Now, as we've just gone this far so far, can all of us, man and woman, practice going along with good decisions? Because even before you get to the husband, wife, the man, woman thing, we have Ephesians 5:21 of submit one to another. And so that means everybody gets to practice submission. If we're to submit one to another, that also means everybody gets to practice team leadership. So everyone ought to be practicing making the kind of decisions that take care of others, while everyone practices going along with good decisions. And so then we bring that into the marriage, where the division of that is typically going to skew. He makes more of the decisions so that she can relax. And part of it is just in my decades of counseling into marriages, and especially once there's children at home, very often the woman's decider is on all the time. And in fact, what's curious is back in the 70s and 80s, there was this transition. It used to be, and here's a curious thing, is because it's all kind of the same thing. So back in the 50s and the 60s, the number one complaint of women was that he is just tyrannical, that he is a dictator at home. Well, he's doing team leader, but he's doing team leader in a very militaristic, domineering, controlling, and punitive fashion. And the women's, with the wives would show up in their clergies, their ministers, their pastors, their priests, and they would complain that I try to submit, I try to go along with it, but he is mean. Well, then part of what happened is, so feminism stood up. And now I think feminism is ridiculous, because you look at what feminism says they fight for and go, they had to fight for that? That shouldn't had to have been a fight. That should have been like a reasonable discussion. And I think reasonable men should go, you have a good point. And that should have taken care of it, but that's not the way it went. So feminism arose to say, okay, that thing where we have those tyrannical, patriarchal, dictatorial, the woman, you're going to do what I'm telling you type men. And women said, like, no. And I think they had a point. But then here what ended up being the flip. So then women also stopped submitting to good team leadership. And so saying, I don't have to do what no man says. And, I want to be a part of this decision, which often just turned into, I want to fight with my husband about the decision. And what started to happen a lot is the man just stopped leading, says, okay, well, if you want to make the decision, I really don't care all that much. In fact, if you're doing all of the deciding, that means I can come home. I don't have to figure anything out. I can know all my decision making and figuring stuff out is limited to work. And then the women ended up not submitting to the man's leadership and not having his partnership either. So then what started to happen in the 70s and 80s is there was this transition where for a while, the number of women who would show up in the counselor's office and say, like, well, he's just a dictator. Started to transition out of that to like, he won't lead. He won't make a decision. I'm constantly having to decide everything. Well, here gets to be a thing is, it's actually the same problem. Is he's a dictator means he's not a team leader. And he won't lead might mean, well, he seems to not want to hurt the team, but he's also not leading. Both of the complaints are the same complaint, that he's not giving me something that I can submit to in a healthy way that's good for me and the family. Well, now the vocabulary has changed. The complaint is the same. Where now wives are showing up in their counselor's office, and the way the complaint is being phrased now is, I have to carry the full weight of the emotional and the mental and the social burden for the household. Well, what does that mean? That means he's not doing the team leadership. I'm having to carry all of it. He's not showing up, contributing his team leadership to give me space where I can relax. And where he picks up the mental burden, I can just go along with his carrying of the burden. Where he picks up some of the emotional burden, I can just go along with him making some of the emotional decisions and taking responsibility for our relationship. And where I can let go of some of the social burdens, and he can carry the burden of looking at the social connections for our family. And I can just go along with it and finally get a break. And so we have this chain going back and forth that is the same complaint we've been getting just on one aspect or the other, either team or leader, in the counseling office from wives for decades. Since before I was born, much less since before I was counseling. And then in love and being lovable, when we have men in the office and the men are talking, often we're working in here and we're working in here, that they don't feel like their wife is making any effort to be lovable or respond to his love, or they feel she is being disrespectful. And we do get a lot of this when a lot of times in counseling offices and men among men, when they're talking about the wives, very commonly, the theme of men talking about women is some version of, I don't get it. Very often when it's women talking about men, whether it's the wives talking about the husbands or the girlfriends talking about boyfriends and stuff, it's, why are men such jerks? Which is disrespectful. So if he is making some reasonable effort to be respectable, but in order to garner her respect, he has to control things that are out of his control. Well, then that's being disrespectful over something he doesn't get a say on. And so we continue down our list. Let's see what colors do. Oh, I've got some more colors here. So one of the things is, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. And so if I am supposed to be understanding, and specifically that's part of where, like, as with a weaker vessel. And so as with a weaker vessel, actually, doesn't mean she is weaker, although, of course, physically, and such and whatnot, that could easily be possible. And especially if you take it back and you think about it in terms of a day when there's no birth control, the amount of time a woman spends pregnant and or nursing back before there's bottles, before there's birth control, you think about, is a woman in a weaker state, and as far as her ability to do physical things, her ability to defend and protect herself, different when she's 7 or 8 months pregnant than it is when she's not? I think most people would agree, yes. Is a woman's ability to deal with danger different when she's got a 6-month-old she's breastfeeding than when she's 20, single, or no children? It is. It changes the dynamic. And so when it says live with your wives in an understanding way as with a weaker vessel, aside from the times where that might literally be true, it's be with your wives in an understanding way. Don't treat her like a cast iron skillet. Treat her like a piece of porcelain. Treat her like fine china. Treat her like something that could break. And that if you break it, if you break her, then you haven't done your job. And you've ruined her worth to you, and you do not deserve to have her. She is not a iron pot. She is not a cast iron skillet. She is something that is prized and valuable and breakable. And treat her accordingly. Treat her like a treasure. Cherish her. But part of, if I am to be understanding, it helps if you are understand. I know that's getting scribble, but understandable. Understandable. That means if I don't get it, and very often men complain that I don't get it. I mean, that's the theme of the average man talking about the average woman trying to understand women, is I don't get it. And so if men are trying to understand women, if men are trying to understand, in particular, their woman, their wife, their fiance, their girlfriend, it helps if you can be understandable, so that he can be understanding. So if I speak to you in a foreign language that you don't know, you might be guessing at what I'm saying from context. Je parle un peu de français, which is I speak a little bit of French. I used to be much more conversational 25, 30 years ago. I've kind of lost a lot of it. But if you don't speak any French at all, and I come rattling off to you in French, you might get some of what I'm talking about from context, but you're going to go like, I really don't know what he's saying. It's probably something about the this or the that or the whatnot. And if I don't help you with the translation, you might have very little idea what I'm talking about. I have a friend of mine who is fluent in Spanish. And every once in a while in English, she'll stop and go, okay, well, in Spanish, there's this phrase. And she'll say some phrase in Spanish. And then she'll go, and literally in English, it translates to this. And kind of what it means is this and this and this and this. So for us English speakers who don't speak Spanish and certainly don't know Spanish idioms, so even if like we studied, conversational Spanish in school so we could have a conversation, we still might not know like, the Central Mexico idioms where there's this phrase that they use. We still might not know those things unless we get a translation, not just of the words, but of the meaning behind the words. And so to be understandable, if say, hypothetically, we think that there's a difference between men and women, and that women have an emotional life and a mental life that is different than men. We can be more specific. So suppose the wife's brain and the wife's emotional experience of life isn't exactly 100% identical to her husband, regardless of whether either one of them is even remotely typical of man or woman. If he's trying to be understanding and she has no words to explain, if he's trying to figure it out and she is no help. He can do his best here and still not get it. Just like she can do her best here and not be able to because he's not giving her any of this. Or he can be doing his best here, but it's very difficult because he's not getting any of that. Or she can really, really want to be able to let go of stuff, but she can't trust that he's going to take it up and do a good job. And so all of this stuff has to do with like you show up with the part of your side that will help someone making a good effort on their side accomplish their side. Let me grab, I'm gonna grab pink and purple this time. Oh, by the respect we talked about, let's see, Ephesians 5:22 up here, Ephesians 5:25 here. Wives, respect your husbands is also Ephesians, but and some of these they appear in multiple places, but it's really easy to find if you just go to Ephesians and you'll see it in 22, 25, and 33. So that's 22, 25, 33, and all of that up there, through there is in Ephesians. Now, when we get down to live with your wives in an understanding way, that is 1 Peter 3:7. So if you want to know where to find that one. And now let's go. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Even though it's a bit more on the controversial side, let's go to 1 Corinthians. And by the 1 Corinthians 13:4-8 is where you find the love passage. But we're going to look at chapter 7, verses 3-5. And 3-5, actually, this is a mutual thing that essentially says that if I'm a husband, my body is not just mine, it's also hers. And her body is not just hers, it is also mine. That we belong to each other in that sense. Now, I'm going to call that being physically available. You're going to know, physically available. Now, very often I've heard that taught as sex, that if your wife wants sex, it is the obligation of the husband to reasonably fulfill her desire for physical intimacy. And it is also her obligation to reasonably fulfill his desire for physical intimacy. And I note, I include reasonably fulfill. Now, part of the reason I think some of this reasonableness is so important is there was this women's group. And the women's group was talking about sex. And they were kind of talking a little bit euphemistically around it because in good Christian circles, we don't speak bluntly about such things. Obviously, if you've been following my awesome sex program that had been running for months and just ended a couple of weeks ago, you know that clearly we do. But in most circles, they don't. But as this one woman's listening, she's going, okay, I'm hearing mentions of condoms and pills and like controlling like how many children you have and kind of like some talking around what you do and when you do it and how you feel about it. But I haven't heard anyone mention the pills. I said, oh, no, we did. I mean, a lot of us are on birth control system. Well, no, I don't mean like birth control pills. I mean like sex pills. What it turned out is that her husband was giving her date rape pills to knock her out so he could have the kind of sex with her that he wanted. And because in this be physically available, she understood as a good Christian woman that wives just say yes to their husbands, just period. And that's just the deal. He gets the sex he wants. And because sex is something that you don't talk about that in good company. She never talked about it. But since it was kind of coming up here, she was curious because none of the other wives mentioned, their husband's sex pills. Well, that's when a whole bunch of bad stuff came out. And so reasonable availability to fulfill reasonable needs. So toss in the reasonableness, but then here gets to be another part. Pardon me. And so in physically available, the reason I don't say sexually available is what if part of what she wants isn't just sex? What if she's not sitting around going, well, honey, I would just like a quickie all the time. What if what she would like is snuggles, cuddles, a bit of romance, some extended foreplay? What if what he would like is some more extended foreplay? And being physically available to one another, actually, that goes back to ancient vows. And so when you get back to what is the deal principle, and so if you go through our Divorce is Okay program, which is starting after Valentine's Day, curious, in fact, part of the reason I'm doing this lesson now is I did not want to start a divorce program just before Valentine's Day. And then the deal principle after that, the original deal and kind of how all of that works is that there was a chain of vows that husbands and wives made to each other. Now we have those today. We have different vows that we use, but there's sort of a standard marriage deal where if you haven't made your own deal as agreed to between you two, here's a starting package. And the starting package in the Ancient of Days, in the times of Moses and subsequent to that, included conjugal rights, included conjugal obligations. And that was the husband to the wife and the wife to the husband. And you see that show up in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where Jacob had Leah and Rachel as wives, where Jacob comes back in from the fields and Leah informs him, I made a deal with Rachel, you're mine tonight. And the husband was obligated to go have sex with Leah, and they conceived a child on that particular night. And so it didn't work quite the way sometimes we like to think. But being physically available has to do with more than just sex. It has to do with making yourself available for intimacy, romance, connection, pleasure, and that's based upon the principles of 1 Corinthians 7:3-5. And also all of this reciprocity. So if suppose we run the stereotype, and I'm going to tell you some more about this stereotype in a little bit, where I'm the man, and especially if I'm a much younger man than I am right now, and so I've got all this testosterone, so I want lots of sex. And so I come to my wife and say, quickie time. Well, she might not be up for that all the time and have that be what sex is. But if I give her romance and I give her cuddles and I give her affection, and that is a normal part of our physical relationship, and it's not just I hug you to see if I can kiss you, I kiss you to see if I can grope you, I grope you to see if I can start to undress you, and it's just what I call gateway. And if you've been through the Awesome Sex program, you know how I feel about gateway stuff. But all of this physical romance and physical affection is a normal part of him being physically available to her, where it's not about getting laid. It's about expressing your love and your affection in a romantic, physical way. That tends to create more of an environment, kind of the tent in which the sex takes place. And so part of being physically available has to do, okay, if what you want is sex, what is it that gets her turned on? And make sure that's a part of the relationship. Likewise, the other way around, where if there's something that is what stirs him to what it is you want from him, what is the counterpart to that? So this physically available thing having to do with sex, affection, romance, and taking from all of this, everything, what's the counterpart? What's the counterpart? And in this mix, remember what we talked about earlier is what can you be practicing? So love, honor, cherish are things you can be practicing from the time you're little. Well, we already talked a little bit about everyone practicing leadership, so everyone can practice submission, because 522 says, wives, submit to your husbands, but 521 says, submit one to another. So in some way, shape, or form, all of us have to submit one to another. So that helps us understand what submission must be, and in particular, what it can't be. Because we know it can't be me, boss, you obey, if we have a mutual submission relationship. In order to receive more love, be more lovable. So you facilitate the people who are seeking to practice love. And so that's something we can all practice, because who wants to be loved? I think most people want to be loved. Well, let's learn about love and learn what do I do, not only to practice doing it, but to practice facilitating others doing it for me. Respect and respectability. Well, all of us can practice showing respect. And sometimes for me, it shows up as gentlemanly niceties, which I practice that with my mother. I practice that with the neighbor ladies. I practice that with the ladies in the family. I practice that with little girls, where, I'll give them some of the gentleman niceties, where I'll open doors. I'll offer to carry stuff for them. And there's a lot of things that I do that I practice, even in my relationship with my mother from the time I was really, really little. In fact, one of the habits we have with, I go grocery shopping with her, a habit that was developed back when I was in elementary school, is I would be, once I was big enough anyway, because I was a small kid, like all of us were at one time, but when I was big enough to push the shopping cart around, part of my job was go get the shopping cart, follow my mother with the shopping cart. And then every once in a while, if it was getting full, I would rearrange the shopping cart so everything would fit. And I put the heavier stuff near where I'm pushing so I can steer it easier, and the lighter stuff on the other end, and organize it so we could keep on filling it up. And I would follow my mother, and then I would carry the heavy stuff. Now, when I'm a kid, she's physically stronger than me when I'm little, but as the gentleman, I am practicing carrying the heavy load, practicing the bicep thing and the shoulder, and so that I can alleviate the physical burden for the lady and then open the door for her. So that's part of showing respect. And part of being respectable is to be the type of person that deserves respect. And how old do you have to be practicing that? Again, can a child be someone worthy of respect? Is there behaviors that are different between more respectable and less respectable? Yes, there is. Good. Well, then do less of the less respectable and do more of the more respectable. About understanding and being understandable. Yeah, being understanding has to do with listen, learn, pay attention, maybe even invest some in really trying to study, really trying to have some conversations, really trying to develop a vocabulary. When I talk about communication, we talk about understand, define, be understood. And so can all of us practice being understanding? Yes, we can. One of the easiest ways to be understanding is to listen more. But to be understandable is to also help define our terms so people know what we mean when we say certain words, and being able to explain ourselves so that someone who wants to get it can get it. And then down here, being physically available. Regardless of the level of relationship, will there be some type of physical interaction? So if I walk into a business setting, my hands are in my pocket, and someone holds their hand out to shake my hand, they are being physically available for a handshake. If I keep my hands in my pocket, I'm not being physically available for a handshake. Now, what if I don't want to shake hands? But right now, while I'm recording this, we are approaching the year two mark of COVID. And a lot of people still aren't like going hand to hand. A lot of people are, a lot of people aren't. So I keep my hands in my pocket and I just, oh, no, I don't shake hands yet. All right, well, what I've been practicing is someone who's made themselves physically available for a handshake. I have declined that availability. Am I allowed to do that? Yes, I am. Do I have to have a good reason? Not necessarily. Will they respond to me as they would respond to someone who won't shake their hand? Yes, they will. And that's an important thing to consider when we come down here. Now, whether if someone opens their arms up for a big hug, or now here's an interesting thing one of my friends do, which is a habit that I think might be good for me to cultivate more, is he'll do this high motion. His elbows up high, his fingers are pointed down. So that could come down for a handshake, or it could come around for a hug. And so he kind of sets it up so it could go either way. And then he lets the other person respond, indicating the direction they would like that to go. And so he's physically available for handshake or hug, and he will take either a handshake or a hug. And so there's some measure of this physical availability we can be practicing even in professional settings, in how we say hello, how we make greetings, even how we just appear physically, like hi, something a lot of men do is that we have this kind of nod at each other and up. And here was a funny thing. So I'm in a completely different country, completely different culture, don't speak the language. I'm walking by a guy and I give him the nod, and he gives the nod up. And I thought, is that just like a cross-cultural global male thing? I don't know. I really seriously, I don't know. But I found it curious. Here I am in a different culture, in a different country, and that same man-to-man nod thing worked. So I don't know how universal some of these things. I don't know if I could go into the middle of a jungle somewhere to an original peoples and do the same thing and have it work. Who knows? I don't know. I may find out, but it's curious. But that's an example of also physical availability. In that case, it's just a physical visual acknowledgement that was then reciprocated. And so then the more connected we get, the more physical we get, the more intimate we get, the more this goes back and forth, and the more we do the reciprocal of what the other thing is we would like to receive in return. And this is the entire list. So there's versions that if we understand physical availability, not just sex, then we know there's places we can practice that concept, that principle all the time. And then where physical availability may be at variance with expectations, how well can we do this understandable thing to be able to have that discussion so that we can show respect for this person that we understand as far as the physical availability goes, because we love them. So all of this stuff we see becomes interconnected. And so if you want to have a biblical marriage, whether you want to be married now and make the marriage you have now more biblical, or whether you aren't married now and you want to take your current romance and make it more biblical, or whether you have no relationship in sight, but you want to be practicing for this kind of relationship. And something you may notice, you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be a Bible believer. The Bible does not have to be your personal primary source material for your life for this to look like a pretty good idea. Because when we say that women are coming into counseling offices complaining about carrying the mental, social, and emotional burden for their household, for their family, for their marriages, no, I don't say Christian women are coming in complaining. I don't know a whole lot about what some of the therapeutic things were back then, but I do know that the ministry counselors back in the 40s and 50s were complaining that a lot of men were taking this, wives submit to your husbands, as wives do whatever your husbands say. Almost like Ephesians 5:21 didn't exist, and they showed up in the Bible at 5:22, and they kind of skipped that first verse. And then there was a period of time where I think we quite rightly pointed out, okay, this leadership submission, you're supposed to be leading with love as Christ loved the church. And that's kind of how that dynamic is supposed to work. But so much of that explanation, I think, starts at 21 of submit one to another, which kind of gives you a definitional framework to look at this. But Do you know anyone that wants to have to be on 100% of the time and never, ever get a break? Do you know anyone that wants to carry 100% of the mental burden for an entire household, for the husband, wife, and the children all the time without a break? The emotional burden, the mental burden, the social burden. Well, in which case, practicing up here might be a good idea. Because, by the way, practicing submission has to do with if you walk something through these 8 gates of submission, and it's a pretty good decision from a pretty good leader, that there's no reason that you really need to do any of the locking down of the 8 gates. Go with it. I have known people who won't go with it, period. Now, I'm going to give you a male example, female example. So there was a man with his wife, whenever his wife would have a suggestion, or whenever his mother would have a suggestion, because he had grown up in this controlling household. And for him, part of being a grown up and finally being out of the house, I don't have to do what anybody says anymore. Well, he would start in this thing where he would be given a good idea, and now he won't do it because somebody else said he should. His wife would give him a good idea. Now he won't do it because I don't have to do what my wife says. Like, well, you don't have to. Grown-ups don't have to do a lot. But for one thing, even legally, if you're willing to pay the price for disobeying the law, you can disobey the law. But the failure to submit to good ideas is a violation of Ephesians 5:21, the verse before that. Of no, I won't go along with it even if it's a good idea because I'm a grown-up and I don't have to go along with anything. Well, that's true. You don't have to, but it's really kind of foolish to just flat out disobey good ideas because someone else gave it to you. And on a woman example, I was talking about a particular romantic evening I had done for my wife. And that part of it had to do with laying out an outfit for her that I knew was going to go with the evening I had planned. And one woman said, well, I don't think you should lay out a dress for her. You should let her dress herself. I mean, she's a grown woman. She is perfectly capable of choosing her own outfits. And I go, okay, well, first off, clearly that's not a woman for me. I chose the outfit I knew would match what I was wearing for her, and I knew would go with what I was doing for her. I gave her an opportunity to make one less decision or several less decisions if you would consider like all of the various accessories that went with it, where it's like, now that you're home from work, because I was home before she was, and I'd been preparing this meal. Here is the outfit. Here's the shoes. Here's the dress. Here's your jewelry. And if you would like to take the time to go take a shower, all of your stuff is ready for you over there too. While I go finish this romantic dinner that I have planned in celebration of our anniversary, because we had stuff going on in our first one. This was a chance to celebrate on our second one. But this one woman was angry that a choice was made for her. Well, that's someone who has the submission issue going on, where because a decision was made for her, she doesn't want to do it. So, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, most of the women jumped into that conversation saying, I personally think that's romantic. Other women said, like, my man knows my wardrobe well enough to know what would go with whatever he's wearing. And if he's already dressed up, then that would save me some time having to go through, what do I want to wear? This, or this would go with it, that would go with it. Like, and it's not like he says, put that on or else. If you don't like his choice, just grab something else from your closet. You already saw how he's dressed. He's dressed in his tuxedo. So if you look at the dressing, that's not a good choice. Go to your closet. It's not like you're forbidden. But you can see that the submit was a problem there too. So one example from a man, one example from a woman, one example from life decisions, one example of just going along with a romantic evening. And certainly in that particular case, that would tell me is that woman would not be a woman for me. because that means I am not allowed to craft a romantic evening where I have already made the decisions. So that would be a bad partner for me because I practice as team leader and I expect the partner to go along with good decisions I've made. If she's going to not submit, I expect that one of those 8 gates has been slammed shut for a reason, not because I just don't do what I don't do what any man tells me to do. And I don't do what any woman tells me to do. I mean, it's equally silly to me on both sides. And so on all of these things, we practice the reciprocal and we practice the thing. We practice the leadership, we practice the submission to good leadership. We practice going along with good decisions. We practice the love, we practice being lovable. We practice the respect, we practice being respectable. We practice understanding, we practice being understandable. And we practice the physical availability and responding to other people's physical availability at a level that suits the relationship and that we're comfortable with. And so all of this works together. All of this is things that we can be practicing. All of this is things that we can be working on. And even if you don't want to be biblical, who doesn't want good leadership? Who doesn't want an opportunity to not go with good decisions? Who doesn't want to be loved? Who doesn't want to be lovable? Who doesn't want to be, but refuses to be respectful? Who doesn't want to be respectable? Who doesn't want to understand? Who doesn't want to be understood? And who doesn't want to have some kind of an appropriate physical connection? And the answer is, well, some people. But most people kind of like this as a nice starting package. Whether you're being biblical or not, whether you're Christian or not, whether you're coming at this from, well, how do I be a good biblical husband? But that just sounds like a good deal. And then there's some other stuff if you wanted to do other biblical things, and because of the time we've covered, I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but we will touch on it a bit. Yep, that works. So we have this concept. Let me try to make this clear for you. Leave, cleave, be one flesh. Now, part of the concept of leave, cleave, be one flesh, a lot of times that gets taught as sex, but we're already talking about sex over here from 1 Corinthians 7, 3 through 5. Now, over here, we're talking Genesis 2:24, I think. Leave your family of origin, cleave to your spouse, make a new unit. Because if this is already sex, so we're going to assume sex is covered, which I do this when I'm teaching on marriage vows too. If have and hold is your sex and romance, then to cleave to your spouse, well, the sex and romance is already covered. So we talk about my way, your way, our way. That you're leaving your family of origin, you're creating a new partnership, this new unit. And if I'm getting married, that doesn't mean she's my assistant. It doesn't mean I'm her assistant. What I commonly see too often is the wife ends up relegated to the support person for the husband until they have children, and then he is the support person to the parent, and she's the parent, and he's like assistant to the parent. Every once in a while, he might be promoted to assistant parent, but as often as not, I keep seeing assistant to the parent. And so both of those dynamics of when a partner is relegated to the assistant level, I think is a problem. That this cleave is a partnership. You have now you have this partnership where there's this family, and then you take a part out of the family, which is either the husband or the wife, and you take this other part about the other one, which is the other partner, and then you put them together, and now you're making this new thing. I think that new thing needs to be a partnership. And you may structure it in a way that from the outside could look kind of assistant-like, but that should not be the necessary dynamic. because even if you craft it as assistant-like, it's the roles you take for a joint mission. Because if all I need is an assistant, I don't need a wife. I need an assistant. I can hire an assistant to just be my assistant. So leave, cleave, be one flesh. And that's the my way, my way, your way, make it our way. And when can we practice that? Well, we can practice that in every friendship we have our entire lives. But we are constantly looking at how can we make this a partnership where being in this relationship is better for me than not being in the relationship, and being in this relationship is better for you than not being in this relationship. And that you can start practicing as friends when you're kids. Every friendship, every relationship, every business relationship should be better for the both of us. I've talked about sorry. 1 Corinthians, agape character. Okay. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. And that's the love passage. So all of us could benefit from having good character. Love is patient. Love is kind. Can all of us benefit from being more loving, be more kind? Love is not jealous. Will we benefit from having that internal security so that we're not jealous, we're not feeling insecure in a relationship for no good reason? Now, I think the feeling of jealousy is perfectly appropriate if you are actually not secure in your relationship. And then you have a healthy response to jealousy. But too often people respond with possessiveness. You treat someone as a possession, that I get to control you because of how I feel. Or territorialness, which means I get to tell other people, don't come near my property, stay off my property, no trespassing, like you're my real estate. But rather, I seek to build a relationship of such quality and caliber so that we have some certainty in the relationship. And so, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love is not arrogant. And arrogance is thinking more highly of yourself than you ought, or putting your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions above the truth. Love does not boast. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never fails. All of that character, we can be working on that our entire lives. And if I'm going to show up in a marriage level partnership, knowing how to do my way, your way, our way, that I've been practicing with friends, potentially since I was little, is enormously powerful to create a marriage level our way, a marriage level us. Agape character, showing up as a loving person who knows how to love unconditionally because it's my character to behave this way, which means it doesn't matter who you are. It's not that I will love you unconditionally on the condition that you're my wife. No, it's unconditional because it's character driven of these things we find in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. Now this one is biblical in this sense, but let me unpack this more. Relationship with God. So I kind of scribbled through relationship a little badly, so it's not even really written right. But yeah, relationship with God. Now, this one does tend to be more biblical in this sense, is that, of course, we're talking God. And so if you're talking God, you're talking theism. And, this could be God, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian. When we're talking relationship with God as a Christian, we're talking about a relationship with Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So this is Jesus Christ. This is Father God in heaven. This is the Holy Spirit that indwells us. But if you're talking relationship with God, relationship with the highest and the best values. Now, in the chain, well, I'm just going to kind of scribble it over here. We have body stuff down here. We have soul stuff in here. And then up in the spirit, we have others, principles, religion. And then above all of that is then God. So R for religion, P for principles, O for others, and that's at the spirit level. So wherever in here you derive the consistent principles from, you want to connect to in a powerful way. So if for you, your highest value is empathy with people, well, okay, that you're at the others level. If you have some rules that govern regardless of empathy, so if you realize, I want to empathize with someone, but they really want something that's unhealthy and it feels codependent. In fact, a lot of codependent people are very empathetic. And a lot of narcissists prey on very empathetic people, because if you operate from this level and you don't have governing principles that tell you when this ought to be changed, that's easy enough to manipulate emotionally and through various means. But then, if you do have governing principles that are more important to you than how someone feels and connecting to how someone feels, then you connect deeply with your principles. If you have a religious faith, as obviously I do, and that's the highest place you get your values from. And for some people, their culture might land somewhere in here, or you have a great God concept that you can anchor your values to, and you're trying to relate as high up in spirit as you have a connection, which as a Christian is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's God. Another one that's much more universal is the fruit of the Spirit. Now, the fruit of the Spirit, I'm actually going to spell this one right, it looks like, and not scribble so much. You'll find that one in Galatians 5:22 and 23. 22 and 23. And that's love, joy, peace, patience. So it's that list. And when you think about that list, it's just a universal list. Think about it. How many people, we already talked about love. How about joy? Love, joy, peace. We'll just take those first three. How many people would benefit from having more joy, practicing more joy, being a joy creator, being a joy experiencer, being a joy sharer, building joy into your relationship so that when you have a husband and a wife together, it's a joyful relationship. And joy is bigger than just you're happy and you feel good. So it's one that's filled with pleasure, it's filled with happiness, and it's filled with joy. So joy is an experience you can have regardless of circumstances. Happiness is an experience you can have because of overall circumstances. Pleasure is something you have during an experience. And so you stack those up where you have the experiences and the memory of those experiences becomes part of your reference point. And then you have happiness over like plans and things in general circumstances. And you have joy over this is the way things work. These things exist. This is awesome. This is how life is. And that you can focus then on the joy. And then peace, being at peace with one another, being at peace with yourself. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. There's a whole list, and the capstone is self-control in there. And so, well, that sounds like good character, whether you're a Christian or not. And so the Bible is full of some good stuff. And then we have other things like forgiveness, being more forgiving. And it's all over the New Testament, but since I've been making use of Ephesians a lot, let's go with Ephesians. Let's see, this one's not 5. This one's, maybe it is 5. No, it's not 5. 4. Ephesians 4:32, I think. And of course, it's all over the New Testament. It's even all over the Old Testament. A lot of people don't realize the Old Testament is a lot about forgiveness. And related to that, self-forgiveness. And for self-forgiveness, I call it agree with God. Because when you think about really the whole message of Christianity, what is the message of Christianity? God loves you, God will forgive you. that he is worthy and true to forgive us our sins if we confess our sins. And so there's this forgiveness element in there. Well, if God is forgiving you, then all you have to do for self-forgiveness is just agree with God and stop beating yourself up over something you have learned the lesson from. Now, if you haven't learned the lesson, honestly, you might deserve to get a little beat up about it, by not because of what happened to you or what you did, but by your refusal to learn. So there's a balance in there, to be perfectly honest, there's a balance in there. And so self-forgiveness is just agreeing with God. If God says you're forgiven, okay, well, God says it, that's good enough for me. And then Matthew 7:1-2, Romans 8:1, Ephesians 4:29. To do with don't judge. So let's judge not, lest you be judged. For by the same measure by which you judge others, so shall you be judged. Don't condemn. For there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, Romans 8:21. And then also something to watch out for that we tend to do a lot in Christian communities too is gossip. And Ephesians 4:29 for that one, about being a talebearer, about sharing people's personal and private stuff that's none of anybody's business. No one needs to make a decision about it. They're not part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. You're just sharing bad information because it makes somebody look bad. And nobody needs to know. You don't need a solution. That's gossip. And very often the Christian version of gossip is like, well, let's pray for Susie because you know what I heard, because that's bad. That's painting a spiritual veneer over a human vice. And we do that all the time. Why? Because Christians are still people. And when you think about it, if I come to Christ for forgiveness of my sins, that means in some way, shape, or form, I am aware that I am a sinner. I am aware that I have a guaranteed lack of perfection and I miss the mark. I have some concept that there's a mark, and that mark is moral value, principle level perfection, and I keep missing that mark at whatever level I miss it. Well, there's a whole bunch of people that they've heard the gospel, they know that Jesus is available for the forgiveness of sins, but they really think that they deserve heaven anyway. So they think that they're good enough people, that they don't have anything that needs any forgiving, that they don't need a savior, because why would I need a savior if I deserve heaven all by myself? Well, if someone recognizes, well, I don't deserve heaven all by myself, versus the people who believe they deserve heaven all by themselves, it seems to me that the people who recognize I don't deserve heaven might be worse sinners than the people who think that they do deserve heaven all by themselves, because they're such good people that God would usher them into his family home because, well, that person is just so wonderful and so perfect that they never did anything wrong to need salvation. They're so great. Let's add them to their family against their will, even though they declined the invitation, and let's bring them into the household anyway. Which is, obviously one way to look at it. But that means, though, in that balance between the people who think they're already so good they deserve heaven and the people who think they're not so good they deserve heaven, well, the don't think I'm so good might be maybe worse. And then they become Christians. Some of them become better. Some of them stay about the same. Some of them even get worse. Except now they hide behind God. Well, I'm not perfect. I'm just forgiven. It's okay. I will pray for forgiveness tonight. I will go to confession, and I will do my Hail Marys. And they get this idea that forgiveness is a license to do more wrong. Or sometimes they might be, a judgmental jerk already, and now they use the word of God to be even more judgmental and more of a jerk. And they say, I'm just speaking the truth in love. Lord knows I've seen my share of that. So Be careful, though, of being judgmental, of being condemning. If there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, well, then maybe we should be careful about how condemning we are, which is treating someone like they're worthless, treating someone like they're worth less, treating someone like they have less value than we intrinsically do. So all of this stuff, leave, cleave, be one flesh. Where can we be practicing my way, your way, our way? In any relationship. Does that sound like that might be a good thing to do? Would you want to partner with someone who just wanted their way? Probably not. Unless you really just want to absolve yourself of all responsibility. And there are some people who want to do that. They want to be what I might call child zoned. What they want to be treated as a child. They only want the responsibilities of a child because they don't want to have to grow up. They don't want to have to be responsible. They don't want to have to take responsibility for their own lives and take responsibility for what they submit to. There are a lot of people like that, and that is their choice. Do you want to partner with someone who's just going to be your assistant? Like as a partner who's only going to assist you. Some people go, well, that sounds like a good deal to me. Well, in which case you don't need a partner. You need an assistant, and that's different. And so if you just, it's my way or the highway, well, then, hire people. Most of us like this our way thing. We like, even if you have the assistant, you want the assistant to be someone who facilitates unleashing you more into the things that are yours to do. You want the assistant to be able to make a contribution where the presence of that assistant makes a difference. Otherwise, just hire an executive assistant. That's an employee. That's agape character. We can all be practicing an agape character. Relationship with the highest and the best principles that govern our lives. All of us would benefit from being kind of more spiritual in that sense, seeking out higher, seeking out better, whether you're a Christian or not. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, and the rest, self-control. That sounds like that's good and healthy no matter who you are. And do you want a relationship with someone who's loving, joyful, and peaceful, or do you want a relationship with someone who is unloving, miserable, and always engaging in conflict? Honestly, some people like the conflict. I don't happen to care for conflict. I don't want to seek out a marriage partner so that I can have daily conflict in my life. Someone that will be forgiving of you when you blow it, not if you blow it, when you blow it. And you forgiving yourself? Do you want to be partnered with someone that you have practiced forgiving and that forgives themselves? Or would you want to be with someone who beats themselves up all the time? Do you want to be judged? Do you want to be condemned? Do you want to be gossiped about? Do you want to be partnered with someone? So then you practice accountability. Don't judge, don't condemn, don't gossip. So when you begin to look at this list coming into Valentine's Day, doesn't that look like a good couple of lists to show up with to be more loving, coming into celebrating our love days, celebrating our relationships, seeking to be godly partners, whether we're already married, whether someday we may want to get married, or even we just see these as good things for whatever level of relationships we have with our friends, with our colleagues, with our families. This is Pastor Scott Conway. Happy Valentine's Day.